In the past few weeks, Donald, with the assist of other members of the Trump regime, has pushed into full blown authoritarianism from censorship, hostile city takeovers, and everything in between. But Donald isn't just moving erratically. And by erratically, I mean giving unhinged speeches in front of the UN and at Charlie Kirk's Suda Memorial. He's also, even though it doesn't seem like it, working methodically off of an authoritarian playbook, also known as Project 2025. Li Yuan, writing for the New York Times, did a deep dive into the ways in which Donald is directly taking his cues from a certain dictator. He wrote, quote, to many Chinese who have endured the relentless erosion of speech by the country's top leader, Xi Jinping, it felt ominous. Free speech rarely vanishes in a single blow. It erodes until silence feels normal, unquote. Zhuan spoke with Zhang Wenmin, a former investigative journalist in China, better known by her pen name Zhang Shui. Zhang was repeatedly harassed and threatened for what Chinese state security agents called her quote unquote negative reporting on China. She now lives in the United States and said, quote, coming from a dictatorship, people like me are sharply attuned to these things. We can sense how freedoms are chipped away little by little, unquote. And that's exactly what happened in China. The censorship started slowly until it was simply too late to pull things back from the brink. Years ago in China, investigative journalists like Zhang helped expose corrupt officials in the government at a time when public debate was allowed and people were able to voice their concerns. That started to change, again, slowly, after Chinese President Xi took power in late 2012. The Times chronicles how they first muzzled the newspaper's editorial abilities, then elevated the role of a government official to control the internet and declared that all media must, quote, love, protect, and serve the Communist Party, unquote. There was resistance, strikes by journalists, protests by members of the public, and displays of solidarity from entertainers, intellectuals, and entrepreneurs. The government responded with arrests, penalties, and prohibitions. Within a few years, critical journalism in China and investigative reporters became extinct. Sound familiar? This is precisely the road the United States of America is on right now. We learned last week that head of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, one of the most sycophantiest of Donald's sycophants, has as his agenda silencing any voices in media that do not bow down to Donald Trump. And then we learned that Donald himself is responsible for what happened to Jimmy Kimmel. He actually admitted to us that ABC had promised him that Kimmel was going to be canceled. And now that ABC has gone back on its word, allegedly, Donald is threatening to sue them again, claiming that that suit will be more lucrative than another suit he brought in which he was paid, for reasons I don't begin to understand, $16 million. But before we go on, we must oppose dictatorship at every turn. So please like and share this video. And if you believe in our mission, subscribe to our channel. Fascism scholars have warned that Donald is simply following in the steps of authoritarians before him. The censorship and crackdown on critics is just the beginning of worse. Jason Stanley, an expert in authoritarianism who left Yale University for Canada earlier this year over fears of impending authoritarianism in the United States, spoke on MSNBC to chronicle just how Donald is behaving like the dictators who came before him. Take a look.
Yeah, this is completely playbook, what is happening. And scholars of authoritarianism have been warning about this for years. Every authoritarian ever waits for an atrocity to happen, a terrorist attack, and they have planned how they're going to use it. They're going to use it to target the political opposition. Stephen Miller is now talking about Democrats the way he talks about immigrants. So this is just what we expected. It's exactly what happens in any authority. It's what you would do if you were scripting this. You would wait for some atrocity to happen that shocks the nation, and then you would blame it on the political opposition and use the levers of the state to target the political opposition. This is the next phase. This is the U.S. citizen phase, the targeting of U.S. citizens.
There is no doubt that Donald and others in his regime are waiting for some horrific event they can exploit. We saw them do this with the murder of Charlie Kirk. But what is also something we need to keep our eyes on are the ways in which Donald himself and people like Kristi Noem and Tom Homan and Stephen Miller are creating the conditions in which the horrible thing is going to happen. As Donald escalates his tactics, experts have been clear. This is only the beginning of what's to come. This is only the beginning of worse. Stanley predicts there will be further attacks on the media, or worse, individuals in the media who are critical of Donald, or, and I think it's probably more accurate to say, and or a billionaire ally of Donald will start buying up more media outlets, which is exactly what we saw happening with Sinclair Media and what may be in the works with Larry Ellison and his company Oracle. Other organizations, quote, will be targeted by the arm of the state and connected with crime, unquote, and non-governmental organizations are also obviously next, Jason said. This begs the question, where are we going here? It's clear that Donald is using something called the salami tactic. This is a phrase, an actual phrase, caused by the Hungarian communist leader Matyas Rákosi as a way to describe his technique of dividing and isolating opposition parties during the 1940s. This phrase was also used a few decades later in what was then Czechoslovakia to describe the gradual process of chipping away at reforms that had been accomplished and the opposition. Protect Democracy, an organization dedicated to spreading awareness about the authoritarian playbook, writes, quote, by using salami tactics, slicing away at democracy a sliver at a time, modern authoritarians still cement themselves in power, but they do so incrementally and gradually. Sometimes their actions are deliberate and calculated, but sometimes they are opportunistic, myopic, or even bumbling. There is no longer a singular bright line that countries cross between democracy and authoritarianism, but the outcome is still the same, unquote. They break down the playbook as follows: scapegoating vulnerable communities, corrupting elections, stoking violence, politicizing independent institutions, spreading disinformation, aggrandizing executive power, and quashing dissent. At this point, Donald has done all of these things in many cases simultaneously. But if you ask me what his next target might be, in order to accrue even more power to himself, I would look squarely at the upcoming midterms in 2026. I think we're past the point of not taking Donald Trump seriously. Yes, he's an idiot. He's a moron. He's ignorant. He's uneducated. But he's very, very good at keeping people angry, at keeping people confused, and stoking chaos and rage in the electorate, at least among his base. So, under cover of all of that, he has, with the help, of course, of the fascist Republican Party and the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court, become the most powerful executive in United States history. The fact that he's an idiot actually only makes that worse. And we also have to remember that democracy, or at least the trappings of it, will not protect us from descending into fascist authoritarianism. In fact, countries like Hungary actually democratically elected the people who are now strongmen, destroying their democracies. So, eyes open, heads up, pay attention, and let's make sure that the 2026 elections actually happen and are actually free and fair. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.